Okay, I'm back. I have a different pouch. It's exactly the same. I'm at exactly the same stage, but I finished the other one because I ran out of juice in my phone. So I basically recharged it and I carried on with the other one. So this is another one that I'm doing. So we've attached our exterior fabric to our foam. We've added our tabs to our zipper. We've added our zipper to the tabs on the external part. We've fitted a tag to the outside of our pouch. So you can see now that if we lay it flat where the zipper is, it kind of pulls those side bits in, and that's fine, and that's why we didn't baste the rest of the foam. Now I'm hoping you've been following the pattern alongside the videos for this, because the one thing I forgot to mention in the last videos was that we needed to make a mark on our zipper. Now if you haven't already done it, it's fine, you can make a mark now. You're going to make a mark that is 4 1/4 inches from one end, which basically is the center point of the zipper. So I'm just going to use my ruler and find the center mark and mark that on both sides of my zipper. So, and then I'm going to take that centre mark. I'm going to open my zipper first. Take the centre mark and match it up with the centre mark. What I am going to do first though is trim off. I do this every time. I always have a little bit of foam that I need to trim off at the top. I'm going to match that centre mark with the centre seam. And I'm going to clip it in place. I'm going to need more clips, so let's just move some of this out of my clip pot that I seem to have a pot that I keep my clips in that tends to gather all the other detritus off my table as I'm going. So having made sure that the centre is lined up, I'm now going to move along the zipper, clipping as I go. And you'll notice that where that tab is on the top of your external piece, it will fold over at the point where the tab meets the main part of your exterior. That's fine, that's how it should be. Your zipper tab, however, the lining zipper tab should be I don't think didn't do the stitching on that, that's fine. They'll be fine without. So your zipper tab should be facing outwards. Your zipper will fit nicely along the top edge. So if I just press those angles down, you can kind of see them when I hold them up. Oopsie-daisy. So my zipper is now attached all the way along the top. And you can see underneath the zipper tabs, we have a sort of an angle. So if I just take that off and move the zipper tab out of the way, this is the tab on the main exterior fabric. And it actually folds in that corner in to give you that 45-degree angle there. Then the tab comes out over the top. So you can see that's sitting nicely along the top edge, and I have that 45-degree angle at both sides. And that's the way it should be. And I'm going to stitch along the side of that zipper, including those tabs, at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Let me just thread the machine up again. Move the so going all the way from one end to the other at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. When you get to the zipper, if you need to move your zipper pull, put your needle in, move your zipper pull out of the way. I say needle in, I mean needle down, sorry. And continue stitching. If you try and manoeuvre your needle past the zipper pull without moving it, you'll find that you just get a wobbly stitch, which is unpleasant. Right, so now you have your two lining pieces. One of them has a zipper pocket and one of them doesn't. You want the one without the zipper pocket. If you followed the pattern, you should have some marks on here. You should have a mark centrally along the top edge. You should have two marks, one on each side, 3/8 of an inch from the top edge. So there we go, central mark, and one on each side, 3/8 of an inch in from the edge. I'm going to lay this panel right sides together with that zipper matching up that center mark. So making sure that the center mark matches with the one on the zipper or with the seam, whichever you feel happiest marking it with. Your 3/8 of an inch mark should come to just before the edge of your zipper tabs, your lining zipper tabs. So I'm going to clip that all the way along, and I'm going to then stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance between the 3/8 of an inch marks at either side. Don't go further than the 3/8 of an inch marks. Again, 1/4 inch seam allowance, back stitch just at the beginning. When you get to where the zipper pull is, stop with your needle down, lift it up, move the zipper pull out of the way, so you get a nice straight line of stitching along the side of your zipper. And all the way to the other side to the 3/8 of an inch mark. There we go, that's fine. Right, now you can pull your lining, trim out your foam, apologies, got carried away there. Trim out the foam from the seam allowance behind the zipper. Don't trim any further than that though, just where the zipper is, just to remove any bulk. If you can get any out of that central seam, then please do, because that will just help when you're doing your top stitching. There we go. Then I'm going to take my lining panel and I'm going to fold it over so that it's wrong sides together with the front panel, and I'm just going to kind of finger press it to make sure that that seam sits nicely. I don't want my lining to be bulky on the inside. Now, if it makes it easier, open the zipper so you can kind of get a feel for where the lining is with regard to on the front. And then we're going to pull my thread out again. It seems to be an occupational hazard for me today. We're going to top stitch along the side of the zipper. Now, this is a really odd construction you'll find, I think. Certainly not something that you will have done before, I suspect. So we've pushed our lining behind. Now you can press that if you want to. And you can see that you've got this little sort of almost like a corner where the side of the zipper pokes up. So you're going to have to kind of flatten it down a bit, just manipulate it out of place. You can easily press this all afterwards. And you're going to start your stitching at the point, we're going to stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to start our stitching at the point where the tab meets the zipper. So actually, if I hold this up, you can see. So where the tab, let's find a pointy thing, something I can point with. Be careful not, I'll use my biro, but be careful not to have the biro out. So we're going to start stitching here. So just where this tab meets the zipper. And we're going to stitch all the way along to the same point at the other end of the zipper. So just below where that zipper pull is. So we're going to go all the way along, top stitching at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Leaving long threads at the beginning and the end because we can bury our threads again. I think I've run out of bobbin thread now, just to... Nope, I've still got some in there, that's fine. Okay, so long threads top and bottom. And we're just going to top stitch along the edge. We're not back stitching at the beginning or the end because we're going to bury our threads. It looks so much tidier. So top stitch length, ready, steady. Slow down as you're going over that central seam, because that will be a little bit thicker. And make sure that your lining is folded nicely to the inside. And stop at the other end of the zipper. Pull it out. There we go. Now we've already looked at how we bury our threads, so this isn't going to be too much of a strain for you. So taking your needle, self-threading or otherwise, popping your thread from the front of your work through to the back of your work at both ends of your top stitching. And tying off with a couple of knots, and you can either bury those threads further, or because this is right inside of the top, I'm actually just going to snip those extra lengths off and leave about a 1/4 of an inch, I guess. Don't cut them too close, because even though you've knotted them, you will find that that knot will come undone if you cut them too close. So you need to leave about 1/4 of an inch. If you're worried about the knots coming undone, you can put a tiny little spot of fray check on the knot, which does help to kind of give you a bit of peace of mind. So there we are. We have the first part of the box part of our tabs done. So one part of our lining and our exterior. Right, now we're going to take my whole panel and we're going to fold it in half. And we have to line the foam up again, because where the foam's been kind of pulled out of place, we need to line the foam and line the exterior pieces up and match up those shorter ends and clip them together. And remember, we're lining the fabric up rather than the foam, so if the foam doesn't match up, we can trim a little bit off, but the fabric needs to be perfectly lined up. And our first interior panel, first lining panel for this pouch is already on, and it'll be on the outside with it right sides out. It does look a bit odd at this point. I promise you, it'll come together. So we're now going to stitch down that shorter side that we've now just folded together at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Trim your threads, and we're going to get rid of any foam from the seam allowance on both sides. And this, what we're doing on this side, is just a repeat of what we've done on the other side. However, when we do the top stitching down our seam, we have to be a little creative, because obviously we can't open it up flat to do. So we're going to actually stitch from sort of within the pouch itself, which probably sounds a little bit odd, but it'll come clear, I promise. Now I'm just going to grab my iron, because I'm going to open up that seam allowance as we did on the other seam. I'm just pressing it open. And actually, I don't know if you can see that here, but I've actually joined together bits of foam as well here. So I really am using scraps. So when I say scrap buster, I do mean scrap buster. So I've actually say just join those together so that I'm making a bigger piece of headliner from 2 smaller pieces. So my seam is now pressed open, and this is quite difficult to show you because effectively I'm sewing inside of the bag. So let me just move this over slightly, and with the bag, with the side that I need to sew sort of on the bottom, I'm just going to kind of hold this bit with the zipper on out of the way, and I kind of fold it out of the way so that I can get to that seam. And I'm going to pop the seam under the needle and stitch at the right length. And when I start to sew, you can see everything's quite clear and it looks like it's all going to be where you want it to be. But you'll find that I'm just going to do a lock stitch at the beginning. As you get further down, you kind of have to move this out of the way a little bit more. And it just takes a little bit of manipulating to get to that seam. And you constantly have to move. And as you move this top side out of the way, this side will curl up around your presser foot. So what you end up with is effectively you're kind of almost working within a bowl, because this creates a bowl around the presser foot. Now, because this bag isn't massive, this pouch isn't massive, it's actually not that difficult. It's just hard to explain. And from where I'm sitting, I can see my presser foot really easily. It's difficult for me to explain it to you. It's in there, but this kind of rolls up around it. And without having a camera attached to the top of my head, which is a thought, but not something I'm planning on doing, I've got no real way of giving you a really good view of this. I appear to have what's going on now? To get my thread out, my bobbin out. It's kind of stuck in there somehow. Come on, out you come. How annoying. Let's just see if using the thread cutter usually pulls it right out. Okay, now we've run out of bobbin thread, so I'm just going to refill my bobbin and we'll have another go at that because I've not quite finished my top stitching. Once I've filled my bobbin, I'll show you how I fix. If you run out of thread halfway through something, quite easy to fix, and I'll show you how to do it. It's especially annoying if you're top stitching. Okay. Okie dokie. Let's go in here. So this is where my bobbin threads run out. So I have a, hard to show you, but I have a tail here where I've got top thread but no bottom thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my awl to unpick a few stitches back, so 5, 6, maybe 7 stitches back, which will give me a reasonable piece of thread. Now I'm going to thread that using a self-threading needle through to the back using the next needle hole, and it is just an empty needle hole, and I should be able to pull the bobbin thread up and tie those two off. I haven't got very big amounts of thread there, so I can tie just a couple of knots in. It's only 2 inches long, but it's enough just to tie them off. Nothing looks worse than if you've kind of run out of bobbin thread, and especially when you're top stitching, which is rather unfortunate, and you kind of go back and then you have that bit where you've got almost 2 lines of stitching. So this will alleviate that problem. So I've tied those 2 threads together and I'm literally just chopping them off. And I'm going to go back into where I was. I've got a long thread on the top and the bottom. Back into that bowl to get back to the point where I was at. And I'm going to try and drop my needle into the next available hole. So I'm literally going to wind my needle in to the next available needle hole. And if you're using faux leather, that's even easier because the needle holes don't heal up. With fabric, sometimes they do. So you have to kind of go into the last hole that you stitched. And I'm just going to carry on stitching from there down to the bottom of my work. And now, at that point where I started stitching, I have another long thread. So I guess you can guess where we're going. We're going to take that to the back and tie it off with the thread that's on the back. And you should not have any sign that you've actually had a thread break on the front of your work. On the back you'll have 2 little knots, but on the front of your work you won't have any double stitches, you won't have any indication that you've had a thread break. And it's really difficult to show you because it's kind of inside, but there is no sign that there's been a thread break. And the thread break, if I can put my finger here, is actually here, because that's where the knots are on the back. So this is where we've got a break of thread, but you can see there's no obvious sign that there's been a break of thread. Oh, so there we go. That's how you fix it if your bobbin thread runs out. Right, I now need to do my top stitching on the other side of that seam. Fortunately, we have a full bobbin now, so life is good. And again, I'm coming down and just manoeuvring the rest of the bag out of the way. And what's under here will form this bowl around my presser foot. Just make sure your seam is sitting nice and flat. Do this slowly. Going too quickly is what makes things go wobbly, and it seems such a shame to spoil it at this point. Okay, so now what we've got is a hoop, and we're going to be working inside of this hoop. So we're going to take the other side of our zipper, match up the center mark with the center seam on the other side of the pouch, and we're going to clip that mark. we're going to work along, easing our fabric so that it's nice and smooth. And clip all the way along, including that little zipper tab that you've popped in, the lining zipper tab in. In your clipping. So there we go, all that side. If you're using foam, sometimes I like to just, if it depends on how thick your foam is, just kind of roll that edge on the corners down. It makes it easier to get to the very end, but it's very much a personal preference. It depends how easy you find it to get to. So we're going to stitch again all the way along from one end of the zipper tab to the other at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just going to pop my hand in and move the zipper pull out of the way. I'm going to move the zipper pull back, so lifting my foot up, moving the pull. All the way to the other end. So now our zipper is actually fully attached. It's the second lining panel that we need now. So I'm going to take my second lining panel, and again we've got the centre marks and the marks at 3/8 of an inch either side. So I'm going to line my centre mark up with either the mark on my zipper or the seam on my exterior, whichever suits you better. Clip it in the centre and then clip out from the centre. Don't try clipping at one end, clip from the centre out. And again we are going to stitch from the 3/8 of an inch mark on one side to the 3/8 of an inch mark on the other side, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. A couple of back stitches to start, just to secure your stitching. Keep a finger in there to figure out where's my zipper pull. Oh, I've already gone past it. That's okay. Going all the way to the other end and stopping at that 3/8 of an inch seam allowance mark. I'm going to trim out the foam. Because we're now coming to what I think is probably the most awkward bit of this construction. Because we need to top stitch the other side of our zipper. It is doable, but we have to do it in 2 halves. So again, we're going to do long threads, top and bottom. You'll get used to this now. It's a really good way to finish your work and make it look tidy. It's a quilting technique, but it just works. So I'm going to fold my lining panel out. So now you can see we're kind of working from the inside. I'm just going to fold my lining so that it sits nicely. You can press that if you want to, but I rarely do. I'm going to open it up and I'm going to start my stitching at the centre seam. So on this side, and I'm going to do my stitching at a 1/4 inch seam allowance as I did on the other side, and I'm only going as far as the end of the zipper. On this side, I'm going to literally start in the middle at that centre seam, and I literally will drop my needle into that centre seam Long threads, don't worry, no back stitching required. I'm just going to stitch along. As you get towards the end of the zipper, you do sometimes have to kind of manipulate it a little bit to get to the end of the zipper. It's only a few stitches. Pull your needle out, pull your work out, and leave long threads. Now I like to bury this central thread first before I do the next line of stitching, just because otherwise I find myself stitching it down. So I'm literally going to pop that thread from the front of my pouch, from the outside of my pouch, through to the lining side. I can do the end ones afterwards, but I want to do this one now because, say, it sometimes gets a bit tangled up inside. So I'm tying it off, and because this one is centrally and I don't want it to show, I'm just going to thread those up, and I'm going to lift up my lining, and I'm going to pop the ends of those threads through so that they sit between the exterior and the lining. I'm just trimming them off, and now you can't actually see them. You can see the top stitching goes from the centre to the outside, but you can't see where else it goes. So having finished that side, that part, I now need to do the other half, and I'm going to do this from inside of the throat of the machine. So I'm going to go from the centre again out to the outside, but you need to have the pouch inside of the machine, so inside of the throat. If you haven't got a big machine like I have, then you can curl this up to get into there, but this is the easiest way to do it. Now this is the more difficult half because you've got your zipper pull here. Be careful you don't stitch over your zipper pull. Make sure your zipper pull is as far to the end as it possibly can be, and again drop your needle into that center seam and carefully and slowly come across and you'll find you can get within about 1 centimetre, half an inch, and then you have to start to manipulate the pouch. Be careful you don't stitch through your zipper pull. It's easy to do that. I've done it a couple of times now. So that's good enough for me. Look, Daisy. Then you can take your threads. Oh, that's the lining thread. I don't want to take the lining thread to the outside. I want to take the outside thread to the lining. And you can turn your pouch inside out if in the right way out, if it makes it easier to do this. I just keep changing it back to front to back tedious. And a lot of people find tying off tedious, but it does give a much nicer finish to your finished product, so it's worth the effort. If you choose to backstitch, it's fine. It's really very much your call. It's just a finishing touch that I like. So taking those ends so that they're between the lining and the exterior of the pouch, and you won't see them at all on the inside. So now I just need to do these. I'm actually going to turn it in the other way so that I can do this. It is easier, so that my lining is on the inside and my exterior is on the outside. And this is the first time you can kind of look at it and see what you're actually properly doing. It's quite exciting, actually. I've got a piece of thread there that doesn't belong to anything. So I'm just going to take my thread from the outside, through the next available hole, through to the inside. And I'll do the same at the other end. And you can kind of see where it's, you know, where we're at now. It's starting to take shape. But I'm going to just turn it wrong sides out again, because I need to tie those threads off. And you can see, even with really thin foam, it feels quite stiff, feels quite structured. Having those seams centrally on the exterior and then on the sides in the lining gives it kind of 4 areas of stability within the actual structure itself. So I'm just going to trim those off, because I don't need those, and they'll be right up and tucked away. Nobody's going to see them. It's just the ones in the centre that I tend to bury within the lining. Okay, so open the lining pocket. Big capital letters, open the lining pocket. Make sure your top zipper is also open. Now you're going to fold out your 2 lining panels from your exterior, and you're going to match up your bottom edges. Clip them. Make sure that they're matched at the corners as well as at the bottom. And then you're going to stitch along the bottom here at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if you pull the lining up out of the way, you're going to then open up that seam. You can either finger press it, or you can just take the iron to it. It takes 2 seconds to press. So you're basically pressing that bottom seam open. Then we are going to come in and look at the sides. Now, you're going to have to pull this part, this is the exterior, out of the way to get to the sides. And you're going to be able to just clip them together. It is tight, and you're only going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and there's not a lot of fabric to play with. You may find it's easier actually to do with a zipper foot from the top. And if you've got a really wide foot on your machine, but you're going to go from the top to the bottom using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, not catching the exterior fabric or foam. So you need to kind of pull this corner out of the way. As you do this, that should just about cover the end of the zipper tab, the lining zipper tab. There's a tiny little area that's not stitched. If you want to put a few stitches through it, that's fine. It's all completely, there's no raw edges as such, but there's a little tiny bit of zipper tab that is poking under. You won't see it in the final pouch, and it's right up in the inside. So for me, I just leave it. It doesn't bother me. It's 1/8 of an inch, that's all. So again, we're going to pull the exterior fabric out of the way, match up the top corners of our lining, and then stitch down the sides of the lining at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I'm just going to pop my hand inside, and I'm just going to open up those side seams. Now if you've got a tailor's ham or anything like that, pop it inside and press that. Me, I've got asbestos hands, so I'm actually going to press it on my hand because I've got a couple of layers of fabric between me and the heat. I tend to only do the bottom bit because it's actually quite difficult to get to this top bit, so pressing that bottom bit will help to make those pleats nicely, those corners nice at the bottom. So unless you've got asbestos hands, do use something else. Rolled up a tea towel or something like that inside. I do have a tailor's ham. I just can't be bothered to stand up and pick it, get it, which is awful, really. There we go. So now I've pressed open the side seams, pressed open the bottom seam. My hand is inside of the pouch from the bottom of the exterior, and I'm going to just splay my fingers slightly inside, which will box up the corner, and you can see that the seams sit nicely together. So if you want to clip them, do so. I tend to not. I tend to keep hold of them and then just stitch them. And you're going to stitch across those corners, across the corner at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now trim off any excess seam allowance. I just don't like it too bulky in the corners, so I take it down probably by about half. Go back into the lining and do the same thing with the other corner, giving you another perfectly beautiful boxed corner. Stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure that the seam allowances stay open. Where you've opened those seam allowances, make sure they stay open as you stitch, which will make your corner nice and level. See, they're open on both sides. It takes the bulk out of the middle of the corner. So now we have our lining is now completely finished. This is your last chance to check that the interior pocket is open. If you haven't opened an interior pocket at this point, then you're going to be using your seam ripper in a little while. So I'm now just going to match up those two bottom seams. So where the two panels match, I'm going to literally match those seams together. And then I'm going to stitch along the bottom edge of my pouch at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You notice that the seam allowance changes from one place to another, so please be aware that the seam allowance is not the same all the way through. For the lining it's a 1/4 of an inch, for the exterior it's 3/8 of an inch, for the zipper it is a 1/4 of an inch. The pattern does explain to you all of the seam allowances. And as I say, the videos are not to be used on their own, they're to be used in conjunction with the pattern. So now we're going to rip out those basting stitches along the bottom of our pouch using a seam ripper, or I'm quite partial to using a craft knife for this, it has to be said. But having got my seam ripper, then I will use said seam ripper. So we're going to rip those stitches on both sides, only the basting stitches, the stitches that base the foam to the exterior. And then we're going to trim out all of the foam from the bottom edge from both sides, because don't forget all of the seams have two sides, so it's not just this side, it's this side too. Right, now I need to box my corners on my exterior, and to do that I'm going to pop my hand in through this internal zipper pocket. Pop my hand in. Now if you can press those seams open. If you find that that's quite difficult, and it can be depending on what you've used, you can just finger press them, but splay your fingers inside to give you a nice boxed corner, and make sure that the seam on the bottom sits perfectly centrally. Now it's not going to match up with the side seam because we don't have a side seam, so you need to make sure that it's actually nice and central, otherwise the bottom of your pouch will be wonky, and it won't sit up straight, which will look odd. So once you've got it and you feel you've got that seam centrally, stitch across. At 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and trim off any excess. Exactly the same for the second corner on your exterior. So use your fingers inside to push that open. Once you've had your fingers inside, you can then kind of manipulate it with your fingers outside. So you kind of grab it as you go. And there we go. That's a nice open seam. And again, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance across the open seam. Trim off the excess seam allowance. And our pouch is pretty much complete now, but it doesn't look much like one, does it, at this point? So what we're going to do is we're going to pop our hand in through that pocket, and as I pop my hand in, I'm going into the main exterior of the pouch, and I'm going to pull the main exterior of the pouch out through the pocket. This is quite a large pocket for a fairly small pouch, so this shouldn't be too troublesome unless you've used very thick foam or very, very thick fabric or very, very thick faux leather, in which case, buyer beware. For anything like this where I'm not giving you real specifics, you kind of have to use your own knowledge of fabrics and what you're capable of doing and what your machine's capable of doing. To figure out which fabrics are best for you. Now, I mean, I've done these in faux leather and fabric because I know that I can sew those things, and I know that I don't have a problem with my wrists being sore if I try and turn things. So pop your fingers inside and push those top tabs out. Push your fingers inside and push your lining right into the pouch itself, so you're kind of pushing all those corners out. You've made it a bit wrinkly, but that's fine because you can press it. Then you're going to pull the pocket linings out. Once you're happy everything's where it should be, you're going to be the linings out of your zipper pocket inside of your pouch. You're going to pull them out, and where you did those folds on the pocket lining pieces, we're just going to, you can clip them together, or you can just pull them together and stitch, which is what I'm going to do. And you can stitch along the edge. You can close this pocket up by stitching either along the edge at 1/8 of an inch to seal those two folds together, or you can slip stitch if you prefer by hand. I don't do any hand sewing unless this is absolutely necessary, and I certainly don't do that on the inside of pockets, because as far as I'm concerned, it's a pocket inside of a bag, and I don't know about you, but I don't check the inside of pockets inside of bags. So, you know, it doesn't, I think this is sufficient to do it by machine. So push your zipper pocket lining back into your zipper pocket inside of your pouch. You can then do that internal zipper up, and then all that remains is for you to give her a really good press. Now, if you've used faux leather, clearly you can't press that because it doesn't like being pressed, because it will melt. You can actually touch it with, you can actually do it with a pressing cloth if you're very careful. But mostly with faux leather, I would say just put it in a warm place and leave it overnight, or pack it with something if it feels a bit wrinkly, and leave it overnight. You'll find that it will sort itself out. So press those tabs out and the corners. And what you have is a beautiful little pouch with lovely box corners and integral zipper tabs. So there's no separate zipper tabs, there's no gap at the end where people say, oh, I can't, my lining's showing. Your zipper is fully contained, and your zipper tabs are an integral part of your pouch. So there it is. There is your Etta.